This is my 1963 Volvo Amazon, and on this video, we take it to Autocross. So this is our first autocross with the Volvo in 2025. So the biggest upgrades that we did, little recap, is we put in a different transmission, different gear ratios, still a T5. We have a lightweight flywheel and a spec clutch. I believe it's a stage 3+. That's really the drivetrain upgrades, aside from adding a better wastegate spring that is now regulating the boost pressure to 22 psi, and we're not really trying to do any kind of gain with the boost controller, just a full solid spring pressure off the wastegate, 22 psi, and not really changing from that. So it builds boost way better than it did last year. You don't really get the loss as much, or there's less tuning in it, and it's just a little bit easier for it to hit the 22 psi versus last year. I think we were doing I want to say 12 or 15 off of the spring, and then the rest was regulated, so it was really hard to have too much gain and it would overshoot and be way too high. And this is just way more consistent, and it's really way more fun to drive with this setup. I do intend on, going into some tuning in the boost control, but that's when it can handle more boost. So right now it can't really. It's topped out at like 22. We can push it to 25, but ultimately we're gonna make a window and a block, and we don't want to do that. Anyway, some of the other things that we had a problem with last year was the seats. We had the shoulder, or the 5-point harness, which was great. We did have a pair of cheaper seats. They didn't have a brand name. When I was doing autocross last year, and as soon as you accelerate, the driver's seat would go back a notch, so you couldn't have it sitting all the way up, and that made that not fun. Right, so that, and the fact that those seats, I didn't really fit in them. They were okay, but they didn't really have the right bolsterage to keep me from going in places I don't need to go. Plus, we can really optimize the 5-point harness by adding these other seats that we added. These are a set of NRG seats. They have a spot for the bottom crotch belt, so to speak, so you can actually use and utilize the 5-point harness versus it wrapping around the whole front of the seat, and obviously you slide around a little bit more. The transmission working way better, but at this particular autocross, is our first one of the year, we ran all season tires on all 4 corners, and I believe it was a 215 I think it's 215 or 50 R18. I could be wrong. And the rear was a 245 40 18. So, but being all seasons, you can see the car kick out. That is another area for improvement. This year, there was a few changes to the interior as well. So we went to a Momo steering wheel that's a little bit more appealing and color coordinated with the rest of the car, as well as a 5-inch odometer tack and shift light. Before, we had no tack at all, and you had to kind of drive by feel. Now the downside was you'd hit the rev limiter, or what it would seem like the rev limiter, and you'd have to be like on the ball. You couldn't anticipate it. And especially with this car, it really creeps on you pretty quick. So the shift light helped out quite a bit, especially on the track, because you can kind of anticipate it a little bit better. Plus, I don't always drive with a helmet on. Obviously, at this autocross, sure, all racing, you wear a helmet. I don't do that enough to be comfortable with the sound of the car, and then you're flying around in the track. The shift light helps tremendously in this car, at least for me. That's my driving style and what I'm used to, so definitely helps. We also added water meth. Now, it's actually just borrowed from my winter car, but it's in here with its own controller and pump and tank. So the controls are just in the front of the car to adjust on the fly. Now, that's really not super needed, but it's good placement, and it kind of puts it for wiring wise mid-cabin, so you're kind of doing 50 in the front, 50 in the back anyway, so you don't have to run a vacuum line to the back of the car, so that kind of helps. And instead of just tucking it underneath the dash, why not have it right up front and center? If nothing else, you can see if there's any error codes, which means, you know, that could affect your tune on the fly. So, right, because I believe the error codes will actually flash, it'll be a flashing red light. So, yeah, those were all great upgrades to make it better for autocross, but ultimately, the limiting factor at this point was the tires. So, I finally got my act together and got a hold of a set of tires. And those tires are Falken RT 615K Plus. They are 200 tread wear. We did go with a bit of a smaller tire on the front, that being a 225/40 R18, and the rear went with a 245/40 R18. Now, these tires overall sit about half inch in diameter shorter than the previous tires on the car, so the car actually sits a little bit lower too. I was glad that the 245/45 also did that, because we are changing that front tire so much, versus the 215/50 that we had on there previous. But again, that was like a no-name brand. It was just kind of trying to see what would look nice in the front and what would clear the fender, because you gotta remember, we're running somewhat stock suspension in the front, at least for geometry, and we don't want to, you know, take the tire out on the fender or anything like that. I'm not sure if I mentioned this in previous videos, but we have actually added a big front sway bar from IPD. It's only the front one we have. I did end up buying the kit, but the rear one does not seem to fit with the Ford 8.8 solid rear axle. It's just a little bit, well, I guess it's really my suspension links that don't make it fit. So we'll be playing around with that in the fall, but basically we ran this season with a big front sway bar, which really tightened up the way this car handles and made it much happier as far as you know, body roll, and kind of reducing that and making it controllable. So here is our next autocross event with the Falken tires on. So I think you'll be able to see the difference and maybe even hear the difference. Enjoy. that horrendous noise was the throttle sticking wide open mid-pass. So obviously I'm driving along, racing along, and I notice when I take my right foot and put it on the brake that the throttle is right to the floor, and yeah, the the tack's just flashing at me, or lights on solid. I'm strapped in the 5-point harness. I basically lunge forward and just kill the car immediately, clutch in, and try to gather my thoughts on what just happened. Because obviously it's scary. It shouldn't happen, and obviously it did. So I basically just do a loop and come back, and I'm like, okay, it looks like the pedal's obviously stuck. It's not returning. So I just grabbed the pedal with my foot and kicked it back. Okay, will this thing start? I have no idea. Did it blow up? Like, it's just, obviously it's a couple seconds long. I don't know what the consequences are of it. I'm like, okay, well, whatever. I'll fire it back up, see if it fires back up. Now, the way this thing is set up on a micro squirt is it batch fires both injectors and coils. So that said, when you go into a rev limiter, you're shutting those off, right? So now, instead of just shutting off an individual cylinder, you're shutting off pairs of cylinders. So it ends up actually flooding the cylinders. Basically, there's a lot of fuel, and the car's not very happy when it starts back up. It runs, it's fine. I get it back to the pits, and basically just do some adjustments and sacrifice wide open throttle, so my throttle doesn't stick. So I basically just adjust the cable and try to figure out why that happened. Now, I'm pretty sure I might have messed with it prior to, not necessarily this event, but I don't know if it was during the week or whatever, and whatever. I didn't think about it too much, or either that or I bent the bracket, one of the two. So yeah, it basically, the Willwood adapter got overclocked, and then it would catch on the cable and then hold on the cable. So to fix all of that, I basically just extended the pivot bracket. It's like an L bracket with multiple holes in it, so I just extended that so the cable is picked up way further away from where the spherical rod end is from the pedal, and that way that can never catch, and it stops in a way more positive manner, and I get wide open throttle. But needless to say, that was a holy shit kind of moment, and well, the car survived. It's all right. Anyway, here's a couple more runs. I went back out there after the throttle stuck, and still finished out my race day, so can't complain.
like, no. There's no way that's right. Two cones and a hubcap, buddy. There's a hubcap out there somewhere.
There was actually some byproducts from this. Later on the way home, yeah, I dropped a baffle in the valve cover, and that was rattling, and then I blew out the exhaust gasket and also cracked the header. Now, is it all coincidence? Is it just because of this? Not entirely sure, and I think that's a little bit hard to pinpoint, but realistically speaking, yeah, it went from full run wide open throttle right down to in the pits off, because I'm messing with the throttle, and that header didn't really cool down very much, neither did the turbo. So that's definitely a byproduct. The valve cover, I think, might have just been a coincidence that the baffle fell. But anyway, so you gotta pay to play. This is part of the game. So we ended up drilling a little bit further into the valve cover and putting in a couple more rivets to keep the baffle into the valve cover. New valve cover gasket, and we took the header out and basically just quickly MIG welded that seam, or that weld. Obviously it could be a little bit better, it could be TIG welded. I did reach out to the company I bought it from, which is Beauport, and they don't seem to have any problems as far as repairing it, but that would take some downtime, and I don't really want that for the rest of the season. So we just, with that MIG weld, that's good enough for now. We'll throw it back in the car and continue our rest of our season and see where it goes. Thank you for watching. I appreciate all the support. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and leave a comment, a like, all that stuff. It helps out more than you think. Thank you very much. Take care.